Which country has the national animal, which is a chicken?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I hope it's some fun dinosaur tie-in. Is it Mongolia because we find a lot of dinosaur species there and that's... No?
No.
That's as close as I can get.
France.
Welcome back to Nature League. We're doing a special Nature Plus that is all about nature plus diplomacy. So, what better way to start off than having an international friend? We've got two Brits for this episode, me, Brit Garner, and...
Brit Theo Blossom. I'm a conservation scientist and a science communicator.
We are obviously two different countries, but we also both have studied similar topics. So we've seen them kind of from the lenses of our own countries, but we wanted to kind of talk about the idea of animals as diplomats. So the way that a species can represent its country or represent something or be the bearer of some idea or thing. Some of the first examples of absolute idiocy with animal diplomacy was not diplomacy at all.
No, just handing out animals. Just saying, hey, I've got something crazy for you here that you've never seen before. Here's a giraffe.
Yes, in fact, yeah, this was Egypt, yes.
Egypt. There's examples that go way back before that though, right? In China and stuff like that. They were thousands of years BC. They were like handing around animals and saying like, here's an animal and it represents us and our characteristics.
Even before the idea of like giving animals though, animals would be kept and then be a symbol. So almost ambassadors of like, I am awesome because I have a tiger.
Yeah.
Rome especially, if you think about the Colosseum and you think about the amount of different animals, particularly ones with claws and jaws.
Yeah.
So the nice thing about that, if you are Emperor of Rome hanging out with a lion next to you, there's this nice idea of like, see what I did there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in charge.
Exactly. And then if you could have that perceived control of something wild, then that then shivers down the spines of your kind of, neighboring nations, so to speak, at that time. Yeah.
So even before giving like other species as gifts, there was still this representation. So instead of actual diplomacy, be more of an ambassador for toughness or for a certain feel of that fear.
And it's crazy how that's happened across all kinds of cultures across time. Like you go to pretty much anywhere and you look at an indigenous like nation that they have a totem animal. They either have like a mammal or a bird or a fish or a plant or something like that. It's like their identity is what they hold.
Well, yeah, one of the pieces of the human condition is our relationship with other species. Like that defines so many of us, even on the country level, right? So for example, like the US. So again, it's not necessarily a diplomacy thing, but it is an ambassador thing or representation. We've got the bald eagle, America. That's like a thing and it's so integral. And look at the bumper stickers and bald eagle, right? Which doesn't really have anything to do with like the land. It's not that the bald eagle is the most common species here or is the biggest species here or has been here the longest. It was kind of a human choice. And like all countries have this, right?
Right.
You were telling me that you guys have one too, and I have no idea what it is.
We have one too. Incredibly patriotic.
Let's hear it.
Because we have lots of them, it's a lion.
Because the wild savannas of England, like what is that?
Well, technically you go far enough and there were lions roaming up across Northern Europe. Do you know what Scotland's is?
No.
It's brilliant.
No, I don't.
It's a unicorn.
That's classic Scotland.
You know what Wales is?
Yes, because I have the Welsh flag in my room, actually. I hosted three fine gentlemen from Wales through couch surfing, and as a token, they did not give me an animal, they gave me their flag, which has a dragon on it. So wait, it's just all mythical or things that don't even exist? At least ours is real.
Yeah. But that was like heraldry. Like that would be that's a part of like your family heraldry would be like an animal that would occur on your thing. And
a crest.
Yeah, exactly, a crest.
So yeah, we've seen like throughout human history, not only connection, but the fact that a species, a non-human species, can be representative of a human culture, and like that's fascinating.
The other fascinating bit about it is not just necessarily representative. It's like in a lot of cultures, we can come from that species. We can actually like morph from one to the other and come in from the wild, natural world, depending on how you want to kind of think about it, and that we are of that, we are from that, which is something that's really interesting as a dynamic, which is kind of like being lost with our connection to to nature. But historically, we're like, we are wolf, we have come from wolf, and we can go backwards and forwards with that. And that's like, that is fascinating, that how that relationship with animals changes over time.
Right, and particularly reliance on. So for the, original, so Native Americans in this region, the bison, that was not only representative of pieces of culture, but because of the reliance on, for survival, either for meat or for protection, hides and this kind of thing, again, that becomingness. But when we go to the grocery store for meat, a little bit different. There's not the same.
We don't have that connection. We don't know where our food comes from.
Yeah, it's a little bit different.
Well, you got to really think about where our food comes from. You know, like the idea that a chicken fillet comes from a chicken. Like some kids just be like, where did chicken come from? Like, they don't know. They don't have that connection, that understanding.
Well, I don't know because I don't know what a fillet is.
Filet.
That sounds better. One of the things you and I are both interested in and have talked about just for fun hanging out is the idea of zoos and what it means for animals to be ambassadors for their own species, right? So the thing with diplomacy via animal trade is typically, if there's a handoff, it has to live somewhere. Typically that winds up being in a zoo. Yeah, and so we see some amazing examples of the trading and loaning, even in some cases, of species because they are so ingrained in that's our country, here, take care of it in your zoo, and this is a thing. And so what kind of examples did you come up with?
Well, you can go back to China giving pandas to the Japanese, like
long time ago, right?
Long time ago, and that's kind of carried on. Like there's been examples of that, and pandas. The whole panda diplomacy thing is a big thing that's kind of happened. But there's other examples: koala bears, and kangaroos. There appears to be real strategical, political kind of like direction about why these animals are being handed out. They're like, there's a massive agenda there.
And panda diplomacy, which, we put in quotations, the reason why is because it is a thing. This is, we're not making this up for the first time. This is absolutely a term and goes back a long time. Now with the US and China, the first example was, one of the big ones that made the news was to President Nixon in the early 70s. Oh, it's such a press op, right? Like, let's take our photos of the First Lady with the panda, with the things. Look, we're friends. Look, we're doing, we have a panda.
Edward Heath, who was our Prime Minister at the time, was like, wait a minute, you get 2 pandas? We want 2 pandas. So a little bit later, we get 2 pandas from China. But by that point, the Chinese were like, we can do this better. Let's make it a 10-year block that we're tied into here, and we're going to charge you, what is it, $1 million? And then it's something crazy like $300,000 or $400,000 if they have babies.
If they have babies. Right, and it's a loan, and that's a very fascinating thing if you think of international relations. The idea of, it's not a gift, because when something's a gift and things go sour, you're still like, well, after this breakup, I'm still keeping the China set. But if you're loaning something, if you're borrowing it, and then there's a bad breakup, that gets really awkward.
Well, and there's examples where the Chinese are actually withheld pandas, or with the China and Taiwan, all kinds of political throughout these going on now in terms of where does Taiwan actually sit? Where doesn't sit? Oh, we're going to give you some pandas. Oh no, we're going to withhold those pandas for a little bit.
You have lost your panda privileges, Taiwan. That is insane. That a single species, just because it happens to live somewhere, is then an absolute tool in this larger, incredible thing that this other species is doing. Yeah. Flip the coin. Imagine if pandas, for diplomacy, traded humans. That is, it's laughable because it's so wild, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah. I think the examples of animals being used in this way is on the decline. Gradually. So we're going to a situation where now, as the public, are we happy with that? Can we condone that? Where do we see this idea of ownership of animals? Because it doesn't sit right with a lot of people. But then it's really interesting in different cultures that would be acceptable and wouldn't be acceptable. And there's historical examples of that where the Queen would have ambassadors come to dinner and have her corgi sitting down, and where the ambassador came from, the dogs are seen as kind of dirty, and they're like, why, Queenie? That cultural kind of specificity of how people perceive those individual types of animals.
Yes.
That was happening way back. And now is it still cool to use animals in that kind of diplomatic way or not?
So we can look at some recent examples. So the G20 from a couple years ago was in Australia, and there was an absolute photo op bonanza, right? So it's all these world leaders. They're about to have to go into a room and talk about conflict kind of things, but they all are like, hold on, we have koalas, maybe koala break first. There's still something there. There's still a human-animal connection that is strong enough, even in modern society, to actually represent a country and to be a token of goodwill or a token of something.
And that's where it's kind of like, you know, we have that connection, that feeling on many individual personal levels, which has kind of gone out into communities and cultural levels. But then when it becomes politicized, it becomes sinister.
In order to use something as a diplomat or an ambassador representative, the subtext here is that we own this. And the we is humans and the this is another species. How fair is it? We humans have drawn lines, fake lines. These are imaginary lines. In some cases, maybe some fences, but country lines, we did that. That doesn't have to do with biome necessarily or where a species range is. A species can exist in multiple human-derived countries. So then it's odd to say, this is ours.
This is ours.
So much so that, here, have one, as diplomacy. How do you feel about that?
It doesn't sit quite right with me. Yeah, it's a kind of like a weird kind of like, we're still trying to assert our dominance on other animals, when we are in a position that we have the intelligence to understand our kind of place in the natural world and the impact that we have upon it and upon these animals. And so yes, we have a responsibility to kind of like be looking after them, but that idea of ownership and kind of manipulating that to get our own way on our own agenda feels kind of weird inside.
It's a little strange. And the thing is that everyone's guilty of it. Again, this isn't a one culture thing. This is a human history, human time, because the human experience is one that interacts with other species. Good, bad, use, non-use. I think it's fascinating that an animal can represent so much. But at the end of the day, they are their own species. And I think that animals maybe should only be ambassadors for themselves.
Right.
On this earth and for what they need and the space that they're occupying. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining me. We've really enjoyed kind of thinking through the way that non-human animals and different species can represent us even in diplomatic ventures throughout the course of human history. And if you want to keep learning more about life on Earth, make sure to come back next week where we're going to start a brand new theme. It is metabolism and aging.